Encounter is brought to you by the Broome County Council of Churches, where we connect compassion with needs as we inspire growth with dignity. You'll find us in special places throughout the community. For those who remain hungry, we provide meals. For those who are challenged, we build wheelchair ramps. We comfort those who are ill, minister to those who are confined, and we remain an advocate for change and understanding on behalf of every element of our community. Connect and inspire. Encounter the Broome County Council of Churches.
Good morning, I'm Jeff Kellam, hosting Encounter this week. I'm the Parish Associate at the Union Presbyterian Church in Endicott. When Jerry Seinfeld concluded his Seinfeld series, a long-running comedy show on a major network, he did some stand-up comedy, got back to his roots. He came to Binghamton and did a couple of shows. And he also did a program for cable called Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee. A program that apparently is coming back and is probably renewed and on cable now. The premise, if you buy the premise, you'll buy the bit. The premise was that he would pick up a comedian friend of his or someone at least he knew about, and he'd pick them up in a special car. It was a car that was either an old classic model or maybe some foreign thing that was just loaded with all kinds of beauty and grace and just in fact, the car was often the star of the show. And then he would pick up the comedian, they'd go for coffee, and they'd talk about comedy. And then he'd drop them back off, and the credits would roll. That was the program. So I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to do a program called Pastors and Priuses Getting Pizza? But I don't have a Prius. You don't have a Prius. No, no Prius. And at this hour of the morning, pizza, when I was younger, maybe it would have appealed. So, but I do have a pastor. And so the Reverend Sabrina Slater is my guest today. She is the pastor of the Christ the King Fellowship, Presbyterian Church in Spencer.
Yes.
And just before we went on the air, you were talking about the fact that you've been there 2 years, but were just installed.
Yes.
Were they giving you a 2-year tryout or?
Right, of course. They were making sure that it was the right fit because anybody can look great on paper, anybody can look great for one sermon maybe, and so they wanted to be very open and honest and have really a year of being able to see their pastor in context and if it was going to be a good fit for the community, for the congregation, and I thought that was fine. I really respected it. And before that first year was even up, we knew it was a really great fit, but I thought it would be really important to respect that. And so in Presbyterian polity and whatnot, you don't just shift things very quickly. You need to wait to an annual meeting to vote and whatnot. And so it took a bit of time, but that was fine. And most folks were like, let's have it. And I had already planned my ordination service, which is essentially like planning a wedding on your own without everybody else's opinions. And so I knew I needed a little bit of space before planning the installation, but it was great.
So they were kind of testing you out, but you're testing them out too.
Both and, yes, it goes both ways.
Right.
So.
And you said you had just done your first wedding.
Yes.
You know, you've just been ordained and installed, and I just celebrated my 50th anniversary of my ordination.
Yes.
I've done what I hope is my last wedding. You've done your first, and it went well?
Yes,
Were
it
you
did.
nervous? Were you scared?
I was a little nervous. It was my first wedding as an ordained person, and it was a surprise wedding. And so there was no real rehearsal. There was no, all the things that perhaps you typically have weren't there. It wasn't a proper worship service, so it was a shorter service, and it was for friends, and you always don't want to mess up the wedding for people.
Sure.
And they really we didn't discuss so much in advance the scripture that I would use, but thanks be to God for leading me to appropriate ones. And it was well received, and it was funny because since it was a surprise and it was outdoor and everyone was standing, the groom at one point was sort of anxious to be done. I'm like, no, not done yet. And just continued on with the sermon. It was fun and it was very family friendly. Lots of people had their phones out recording it, and it was full of love.
I want to be clear that it was a surprise to the Not to the bride and groom.
Not to
and
the
you.
bride and the groom
the
and
three
me.
of you were in on it.
We were in on it.
Right.
We had gone
That's
over
good.
some things. Yes, we had talked about marriage and all of those things, and even the type of vows. But
now, when I was going through seminary, we talked about the importance of premarital counseling.
Mm-hmm.
Do you do premarital counseling? And if you do, what
does it look like?
Yeah, what do you do?
Well, it's developing. For this couple, once I knew they wanted to get married, it was important to meet with them and to talk to them just about how are they going to do marriage. Both of them had been married prior, so they had learned in real life. They knew some of the challenges of married life, and so we talked about that. We talked about how they support each other, just different things, what support systems that are in place, and offered them some questions that maybe they continued to think about and didn't necessarily have answers to, but just sort of thinking through things. They'd already brought their lives together in many ways, but hadn't married yet and wanted to take that step. And so they were also very thoughtful about doing that step and how to involve the people they love in it, in the process. And also we're very open to hearing from me and saying, well, if you have more questions, just ask us, reach out. And they were nervous too, even though it was they knew what they wanted to do. Like the day of, there was some nerves too.
Yeah, I've never met a groom who wasn't shaking in his boots, you know. When I first went into the ministry and did premarital counseling, I would say most of the couples were not living together prior to that.
Right.
And so we had inventories for them to fill out so they get to know each other better, or think about things in a more serious way than they had before. Maybe for the first time talk about faith, because they've been dating, they've been having relationships and so on, but they've never really talked about why they're getting married in the midst of a worship service in a church.
Right.
These days, I don't know, in the past 20, 25 years, I don't know that I've married a couple that hadn't been already married, living together.
Right.
And therefore, a lot of the stuff that we used to do in preparation for these young, inexperienced people, don't have to do that anymore. We still have to do some framing. But,
absolutely. But it is a different conversation. And sometimes they've been married prior or children are in the mix, and so some of the questions are just different. And everyone who is coming for a wedding service isn't necessarily looking for it to be part of a worship service or in the church. And so also recognizing those pieces as a pastor in community and where I serve, I'm the only full-time pastor. It also means that I might be asked for things because I'm a pastor. People know me as a pastor. Well, a pastor's supposed to marry you, or a pastor's supposed to bury you, or whatnot, where they may or may not have a connection with the church that I happen to serve, or any church in particular, actually.
So you've been there 2 years. And this is your first church after ordination.
Yes.
What has surprised you that maybe the question is, what did seminary fail to prepare you for?
Oh, I'm sure so many things. What has surprised me?
You can tell we haven't rehearsed this.
Right. Well, something in seminary that actually caused me some grief and sorrow was that when we were towards the end of our seminary careers, churches would often come onto campus and have some interviews and different things of that sort. And it would be so tense for people because they want to get the job, and they felt it was almost an atmosphere of competition. And for me, as somebody who, it wasn't my first career going into ministry, and I had gotten jobs before and more than one, I also realized if I don't get a job with a church, it's because I'm not supposed to. So I'm not really competing with you for any church to serve, because the church that you're supposed to be at is not the church that I'm supposed to be at, and vice versa. And if it is the church that we're both supposed to serve at the same time, God will make a way for both of us to be there working collaboratively. And that just made me want everyone to have a really great partnership, a really great pairing with the churches that they served. But not everybody was trusting God quite that way. And so I say that because I didn't even know Spencer, New York before they called me.
You're from Washington
State. I'm
State.
originally from Washington State.
And from Spokane?
From Spokane, Washington.
Big city.
Yes, big.
Yep.
Well, and not even big by some people, but big by upstate Finger Lake region, New York standards.
Yes.
And so I had never heard of Spencer, but just in talking with them, it was a really good fit throughout the time. And then when the position was offered and I prayed and just discerned, it was where I felt God was leading me to be. And I knew that when I said yes. Yeah. And then when I came to Spencer and since, it's only been more of a yes, like a more full-bodied yes, like, oh, yes, we're a good fit. And so some people say, oh, you're in the honeymoons. No, it's just a really good match, a really good fit. Yeah. And I realize not every pastor and not every church gets that. Right. And so I'm very grateful for the fact that I've been welcomed so warmly, and people have been willing to try different things like stretching in church or using hand instruments and just shifting things up a bit.
And you're doing some collegial work with other ministers in the area so that you're not a lone ranger necessarily.
Right.
You're doing a vacation Bible school now.
Yes.
Is that ecumenical among
Yes. So something that was surprising perhaps to me when I arrived was the churches in the region already were working together, had essentially trying to do monthly meetings and some different worship services together. And that includes a summer worship service, a summer picnic, a church picnic, as well as a Thanksgiving service with everyone. We also do a Lenten series together and go to all the different churches and some other things. We have a food cupboard in Spencer Vanetten, and that really came from the churches working together years ago, and it still continues to this day.
Wonderful.
And so we have a VBS going on right now, and it's hosted at one church, and four of the other churches sort of take a night that they're going to do snacks and have some additional volunteers there to help out, and that's this week. And next week we're also trying a different curriculum of VBS and hosted at another church, and again, the model of every church sort of takes a night that they should have volunteers there and take care of the snacks, and working collaboratively that way to offer things that are needed in our community and just a blessing to the community, and things that really would be overwhelming for any one of our churches to try to probably manage on their own. Yeah,
and you also, with the children who are coming, who are ages like kindergarten to third grade or something?
Yes, I think we essentially say probably 3 or 4 to 12 would be what we're ready to receive.
A little bit wider span. Some churches might only have 2 or 3 kids or 4 kids, and they can't do this.
Right.
But when you do it together, the kids are going to school anyway together, so they know one another.
Right.
So why not join together and do this ecumenically?
Exactly.
And I'm interested in whether the Protestants and Catholics work together in your area.
So actually there's no Catholic church in Spencer or in Vanetten. I think there used to be one in Vanetten, but it has since closed down. So the closest Catholic churches, I believe, would be in Ithaca, maybe in Watkins Glen. Yeah. And so we don't, because it's not that big of a...
Geographically, it's difficult.
Right.
Sure.
But if there was still the Catholic church there, they would be very much welcomed into the conversation. Yeah. It's both pastors and leaders of the churches. It's non-denominational, it's federated, it's Baptist, it's Lutheran, it's Presbyterian. So not even among ourselves do we all affirm the same things. For example, I can't be a pastor in some of the churches who we work collaboratively with, but we're able to still work collaboratively together.
Yeah. And do you find that the ministers do you get together as ministers, as pastors, for breakfast or lunch, or do you have a fellowship?
A fellowship. We don't have a breakfast or lunch together. During the times when we gather, though, to have our meetings, we do, of course, open and close in prayer, and sometimes there's the time after to connect to see how everyone's doing. For a while, we also tried to have morning prayer, and some would be able to come, but as I said, I'm very blessed and very privileged to be the only full-time pastor in the region. And so all the other pastors are part-time pastors. And so they have other hats that they're wearing all day, every single day. And so it's more challenging, of course, if you're not a full-time pastor, to be able to make the time in your schedule to gather and to do these things during the typical work day.
Right.
And so that poses its own challenges. But I have found colleagues who are great friends in ministry, in my fellow pastors there, who are willing to support and be there. And pastors who check in whether we know someone might be having some health issues, or whether it's just been a challenging set of weeks or something like that. People check in on each other, and so it's really it's a great gift, actually.
When you've been out of seminary now for a couple of years, continuing education is one of those things that's very important for pastors in our tradition.
Right.
In fact, most of us, I think the minimum is 4 weeks of vacation, 2 weeks of study leave, and the study leave comes with money. Not enough. It's never enough.
Right.
And you can accumulate that so that you could go away for a month to do study if your church could let you go that long.
Right.
Have you done any continuing ed since you've been out? And
yes.
What did you choose to do? Yeah.
Well, as an ambitious new pastor, I actually began a Doctor of Ministry program while I was beginning serving at church.
Yeah.
Perhaps not the best
right
idea
away.
Away, but it was a really great cohort, and it was connected with Fuller Theological Seminary, actually. And so I was able to really take those 2 weeks and go be in a cohort with other ministers, talking about faith and work together, and focusing really on what Scripture says about it, and getting to be in that space with colleagues from all over the country and world, actually, and just talking about that and engaging the homework that we had was life-giving and amazing. And it was such a gift because it came only maybe 4 months after starting at Christ the King. And so it really solidified for me the importance of taking the time for your study leave. And it's hard to get away. There's always things going. You're always missing something. But that was just life-giving and energy-giving, and to get connected to others who are just serious about loving God and loving others well, and the scholastic piece as well was great. So that was really where I put my energies my first year in ministry. Since then, I have stepped away from that. It was a lot to be doing while being a full-time pastor, and also serving on our denominational national committee, as well as some other committees. And so I felt that it was okay to let go of that. And then since last year, I had the opportunity to go to a Sabbath Conference that the denomination offered, and that was just, again, a great gift to be away and to be with colleagues. And it was much less of a big conference feel. It was unscripted, with space to really think about Sabbath, think about being a Sabbath people, and how do we lead, because it can be hard for pastors to engage Sabbath, right? So I was able to do that, and also another conference where it wasn't denominational specific. It was sponsored by, I think, Exploration for Theological Thought, or the Theological Forum, and to connect again with some friends who are in ministry in different denominations, and to get away, to get to worship together, to get to just think collaboratively in spaces where you're not thinking about everything that comes with a typical week of being a pastor.
Our guest today is the Reverend Sabrina Slater. She is the pastor of the Christ the King Fellowship Presbyterian Church in Spencer.
Yes.
When we talk about Sabbath, I'm interested in the fact that the topic is Sabbath, but it's also Sabbath to pull you into a time of rest and reflection and meditation. Right. And I remember from our first conversation together that spiritually you find meditation and devotional time so important. You've walked Did you walk the whole way of St. James?
I did walk the whole way of St. James,
Yeah, in
starting
Spain.
in France,
Yep.
going all the way through Spain.
And I told you we saw that church, but we went by bus off the ship. So
Not by 550 miles walking?
Apparently not.
Apparently
if,
not.
If so, I've forgotten that part. So yeah, we did not go as pilgrims. We went as tourists, unfortunately. But
Yes.
still, I thought of you when we were there because I think you're the only person I know. No, I know of another, but I've not seen him in years. David Hyman is a Methodist minister who also walked within the past year, I think, that whole trek. Yeah. Well, but that takes me back to this idea of finding Sabbath. And you know, pastors who work on the Sabbath that everyone else observes often don't take the time away. They feel that they cannot be let go. They don't feel expendable, and so they don't take their day off. They don't take their full vacation.
Correct.
But this is part of your own spiritual foundation, is to find that time.
Right.
Don't you agree?
I do agree.
Yes, right.
I think it's very challenging. And I think sometimes, even for pastors, it can feel as though we're overprivileged. How many of our worshipers, our congregants, have the privilege or the freedom to have a month of vacation on top of 2 weeks of study leave, which is study leave. It is truly work, but it's different, and it still looks like vacation. Or even serving on denominational committees, it looks like vacation sometimes because I'll be out of the office or out of worship.
Yes.
But being in meetings all day is not vacation. It's just that you're not being seen as you work, right? Yeah. So it is something that I struggle with in being able to take the time, and I want to grow into that because I feel most pastors will quickly burn out if we don't take the time, because we are always sort of on and thinking about the sermon and thinking about just the needs in our community, and praying. Right, praying doesn't have a 9 to 5 or whatnot with that schedule, but those spaces. Here's right when you go on a plane, they always say if the plane's going down, you're supposed to take your own oxygen mask first.
Yes,
right?
Right.
Make sure that you have oxygen before you help anyone else.
Yeah.
Because if you don't, you're gonna die. You're not gonna have oxygen. You might help a few people, but you're no longer going to be helpful. Yeah. And the same is true, I think, for us in our spiritual lives. And whether we feel that God is speaking loudly or God is absent, we're invited to pour into people out of the overflow, which means that we have to take time.
Right.
But also, even at the Sabbath Conference, they did also challenge us, because Sabbath, if we look at Scripture, what did God do? First, Sabbath started everything for humanity. That's where we start, not with work, but with rest,
Right.
and God dwelling with us. So also the challenge to the pastor of the dwelling with those whom we serve. We don't just perform, but we worship with, we dwell with. So even challenging that as we work, there's a piece of that Sabbath communion there, really. That's important for us. And part of that is perhaps the preparation done in advance so we can really be present in the worship, not just performing the worship, but present to God and to everyone else.
Yeah. I remember reading once that Sabbath is something that if, in the best of all possible worlds, you take an hour of Sabbath every day, you take a day of Sabbath every week, and you take a week of Sabbath every year. Now that doesn't sound like very much, a week out of the year, but I used to go to a Trappist monastery for a week during the summer, and that was just silence. I was the only Protestant there, in the midst of maybe 5 or 6 or 7 other retreatants. Yes. But that Sabbath for me was so important. I could read, I could walk. I didn't have to prepare anything except for myself. Right. So this was an important thing that I missed later. When we moved away from Virginia and the Holy Cross Abbey, it was.
You missed it.
I could still use that. Even as a retired person, I need Sabbath.
Right.
So I'm glad that you participated in that, but also you bring that back to remind your church folk of the need for that time of rest and meditation.
Right. And even in the context where I serve, most of my folks are retired. And they still need Sabbath. We all we're designed for Sabbath.
Yeah.
And so finding those spaces where we can truly breathe, because we're not God, so it doesn't all depend on us, right? Because sometimes the busyness is an idol.
Yeah.
Because no, if I cease to work,
oh, that's
some
a
things might not
Protestant
get
work
done.
ethic.
Right. We got to do it, but
Yeah.
no, God invites us to work alongside.
Yeah.
But we are not God. We have never been God, and we will never be God. So we can breathe a little bit easier.
Yeah, I like that. Breathing in and breathing out, a part of just the normal process of life. And the word breath, spirit are the same Greek word.
Yes.
And there's something to be learned from that, that's for sure. Well, thank you for coming back.
Thank you for having me.
I started by talking about the Seinfeld show, which was about nothing,
Right.
And so we didn't have a topic today, which was kind of unusual and freeing, actually.
Yes.
So again, we've not talked about nothing. We've talked about good, substantial things, and I appreciate your taking the time to be with us. Our guest today has been the Reverend Sabrina Slater of the Christ the King Fellowship Presbyterian Church in Spencer, New York.
Yes.
And we've been talking about ministry and about pastoral work. And again, you're doing good stuff there.
Thanks be to God.
Yeah, amen to that. And the program that we produce each week does look at ministries, often related with the Broome County Council of Churches, but I just like to talk to people in the arts and folks who are just active in the community, and so we'll be with you again I'll be back in about a month, but our other host will be with you next week. The program is produced in cooperation with the Broome County Council of Churches, and our thanks to WBNG Television for the studio and production, and to the Town Square media stations for carrying the audio portion of the program. I hope that in the coming week you'll find time for Sabbath, and in the process certainly be gentle with people and with yourself. And we'll see you again next week.